Hey folks, Christian Yordanov here. Welcome back to the show. Today we have a great guest for you. His name is Leigh Brandon. He's a highly respected functional medicine practitioner. He's a CHEK practitioner, CHEK Faculty Instructor, ART active release techniques therapist, emotion code practitioner. He's an author, podcast host, and he has over 30 years of clinical experience. So he's a very well respected. As I mentioned, he's in the CHEK Institute, so he is on the faculty there with Paul Chek. He studied with heavyweights like Bill Wolcott, Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, and a few others. And we had them on the other podcast, I think it's last year, maybe the year before, I can't remember, talking about his latest book on adult acne and overcoming it. And today we're going to talk about the topic of chronic pain and resolving that. So, Leigh, thank you so much for joining us today, man.
Yeah, Christian, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. Super interesting topic to me. Actually, I had somebody a couple of months ago talking about a different way of approaching some of this, imbalances in the body that can cause chronic pain. So, what's just let's start high level, and we can drop down deeper. What's your kind of approach to addressing chronic pain in a nutshell, if you would?
So I would say I approach chronic pain from three different aspects, really. So first, you've got the structural, which we can go into. Then you've got the nutritional, which is often an aspect that most people tend to look over or not realize is involved in the issue. And then the final one, which is a broad subject that covers actually a lot of subjects, and that's the neurological aspect as well, that I guess keeps people in pain once the pain has already done its damage, so to speak.
Okay. So actually, let's maybe start with nutritional because this is as soon as you said it, um, I'm like, okay, so what can cause pain? I know prostaglandins
Mm.
can cause pain, and I know if we eat a lot of omega 6s from nuts and seeds and obviously seed oils, that can increase prostaglandin production, and there some of those are pain signaling molecules. So I'm
Mhm.
thinking that that's probably one angle, but I couldn't really think of much else on the spot there. What's kind of, maybe can you enlighten us a little bit on that topic?
Yeah, sure. So there's a number of aspects to it. So obviously, with a poor diet, that can increase. You've mentioned prostaglandins, but it can increase inflammation generally in the body. Again, you mentioned seed oils, vegetable oils. Um, you got things like processed sugar, alcohol. All of those things can, if you like, irritate the nervous system and create an immune response. They can irritate the gut lining. They can cause what's called a leaky gut, which I know you know all about, which basically means that, let's call it, foreign material goes through the lining of the gut into the bloodstream. And again, that's where you get the immune system goes on alert, and that's what creates systemic inflammation. Another aspect to that is food sensitivities, which again I know you know about, but key things, or the most common things I tend to see, are gluten containing foods, pasteurized dairy products. Another key one or common one is soya products. I know in the US, corn tends to be quite high on the list for a lot of people, but you can literally be sensitive to any food, and we're all very different. Um, but again, they have the same effects. They can again create or help towards a leaky gut, but they also stimulate that immune response. They stimulate inflammation in the body. Now, the reason that's important is because, and there's more reasons I'll go into in a moment, but the reason, because people might be thinking, well, what's that got to do with pain? One of the things that increases your likelihood of feeling pain is inflammation, right? And what it's also doing, it's feeding information into the nervous system. So this will be covered when I talk more about the neurological system. But basically, whenever there's a perceived threat in the body, and inflammation is a threat because it's a foreign body or a perceived foreign body in the body, what it will do is the more inputs into the nervous system, the more the body thinks it's in danger. So pain is a protective mechanism, if you like. It's an alarm system, for want of a better phrase. So if you think of a fire alarm in your home, if there's a fire, you will want it to go off to alert you to a problem. So pain is there to alert us, or should I say, to alert our conscious mind of something our subconscious mind is aware of. Just like if you were just about to tread on something sharp, obviously, unless you were crazy, you wouldn't do that consciously. But let's say your foot's just hit something sharp and it triggers off the pain sensor in the base of your foot, sends a signal up your nervous system, up your spinal cord into your brain, and your brain will say, oh, I need to do something to stay safe, which will probably be, I need to stimulate the hip flexor muscles in that leg to lift the foot off rather than push it back down, as an example, right? So the other things with foods, another key thing is toxins. So again, what a lot of people may not realize is that in our food supply, there's actually quite a lot of toxins. So whether it's the NPK fertilizers that are used in non-organic crops, whether it's herbicides, pesticides, and obviously the key herbicide is glyphosate, that we know absolutely destroys our gut. Many people call it an antibiotic because it actually kills all the bacteria in our gut, which is essential for health. Depending on what soil, again, it's grown in, you could have heavy metals in the food as well. And this isn't things you can, just run under the tap and wash it off. It's in the food, right? So again, toxins, foreign bodies, especially if you've got a leaky gut, it's going to get into your bloodstream, it's going to create inflammation. So there's quite a lot to the nutritional aspects of pain, and it's really key that if you're in pain, it might well be one of the things that you need to do to overcome it. It might be the only thing. So I've got an example of someone. So I worked with this guy. His name was Trail. He was a chief executive, and he came to me with predominantly like a sore, aching sternum, breastbone. And whenever he ate anything, his throat would swell up. He would choke. He couldn't swallow the food, and he had trouble breathing. So can you imagine, that's a pretty frightening thing to happen, right? And he went to several doctors, and most of them were just kind of shrugging their shoulders, saying, "No, we don't really know what that is." One of them diagnosed him with costochondritis, which is inflammation on the cartilage on the ribs. That kind of made sense to the sternum thing, but didn't make any sense with what was going on in his throat whenever he ate anything. And one doctor suggested cutting open his sternum, open up his rib cage, and having a look inside just in case they might find something, which he was petrified by that option. He had lost, by the time he came to see me, he'd lost 17 kilos in weight. So he was looking very slim because he was scared to eat. So he actually stopped eating.
Oh, God.
Like some days he could get some fluids in, but he actually stopped eating because he was just too frightened. Because imagine if you can't breathe, that's really scary. So he came to me and he said, what do you think it is? And I said, well, I don't know what it is, but it seems to make sense to me that you're having some kind of reaction to something you're eating, because every time you eat, you're getting swelling in your throat. That makes the first kind of sense to me. So I said, look, what we'll do is we'll run a test and see if you've got any sensitivities going on to food. So we did that, and it came back, and he came up with all these sensitivities. So we did an elimination diet. We cut out the foods that he tested positive to. And within a few days, he started feeling better. There was improvement. It was slow, but there was improvement. Weeks went by, he's getting better. Months went by, and now he's back to eating the same volume of food he was eating previously.
Yeah.
Then his energy levels started coming back. He started feeling emotionally much better. Imagine a lot safer because he's not choking every time he eats.
Yeah.
And then we stopped working together. He was doing okay, and then about 6 months later, he just happened to be in London where I was working at the time, and he came to see me. Now I opened the door, and I literally said to him, "Can I help you?" And he
He
said,
was a
"Leigh,
different guy.
it's Trail." I went, "What?" Right? Because he'd put
Yeah.
those 17 kilos back on,
Yeah.
and he looked like a professional rugby player, like packed on with muscle. And I was just absolutely shocked. Um, and he was obviously absolutely delighted because he'd spent God knows how much money going from doctor to doctor. He was going to private doctors,
Yeah.
specialists, and they just didn't know what to do with him. And to me, it was quite simple. So now all the pain had gone, all the his throat wasn't swelling up, and he was doing great. And interestingly, he's referred family members to me over the years, and they're all doing great as well now. But it shows the importance that nutrition can play, and not always. It's not always a case of, oh, yeah, let's just change your nutrition and everything's going to be fine. But oftentimes it's one of the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. But in his case, it was entirely nutritional. Now, what was interesting was he was actually a CEO of a supplement company,
Whoa.
which was quite interesting. He's gone to do he's on doing other things now. But what it did for me is it just filled me with so much satisfaction how I could help someone that was in such a dire position. Literally, they were scared of that. They thought they were going to die because they couldn't eat, right? And to be able to help someone in that way just really filled me with the biggest satisfaction possible
Yeah.
in terms of what you do for a living.
Yeah, man.
And
Sure.
that was a real motivation for me to continue helping people with pain.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, I mean, headaches. Like, I absolutely. That's one of the first thing I would think is because I remember back in 20 17, 18, 19, my mother at that point had IBS diagnosed for more than 10 years. So she was about 13 years diagnosed, and the doctors did absolutely like nothing, absolutely nothing, right? Luckily they didn't make her worse because that's a very common thing. That if they're useless, they'll frustrate you, but at least they won't harm you. But if they're not, they could be very harmful. So anyway, she at one point she was basically after every meal she was either writhing in pain, like something in her stomach holding herself and all that, or she would have a horrible headache. And then we did a food sensitivity test, and basically half of the foods that test tested for were reactive. So
Mm,
that was 90 foods out of 180. So
wow.
yeah, so now, I mean, now we do this with almost every client as well, and I'm surprised what things come back as reactive. There was one lady, um she had lemon for whatever reason was just off the charts, and even on after like a 6 month retest it was still very high, like very still inflammatory. But she removed a bunch of foods, and just like over the course of a weekend she reported just so much water retention kind of dissipating. And
Mm,
then, I mean, just the weird stuff coming up as reactive for people, like banana. Like it's also like people think I don't eat that food, therefore I can't be reactive to it. But when we use more sophisticated lab food sensitivity tests, your immune system at any point in time can be reactive to foods that are normally benign. And what I find is the chicken is actually coming back as pretty reactive in a decent percentage of people. Probably because it's so saturated with omega 6s, because a lot of those chickens are eating just corn and soy predominantly, but it's definitely an underrated. And as you were talking, I was like, yeah, of course. Like, I remember in my autism book research, gluten and casein, you had the opioid like peptides,
mm,
like the gluteomorphins and the casomorphins, and they interact with the opioid receptor, so they could definitely trigger different kinds of pain and other symptoms as a result of that. So it's a lot it's a much deeper topic than I even considered, man.
mm.
So in terms of, let's talk about structural stuff. Now I've had this issue that when I am doing a project and I'm deep into the project, I am pathologically focused to the point where it's literally causing me pain. Like I remember with my first book, I was spending like 10, 14 hours a day at the computer for 8 months, and I messed up my back and my neck. And then with my second book a couple of years back, again my neck, I could at one point I couldn't turn it, to the one side. It was so bad, and I had to go to the chiropractor over a month to kind of get myself. But what happened with my last book is I started going to Pilates once a week, and that my trainer, she completely kept me together just with one Pilates session a week. So since then, I've bought my wife. She's now a Pilates instructor. I bought her own reformer. We've converted our garage into a Pilates studio for her. So I really understand the sort of the importance of doing things like that to prevent structural pain like neck, back. But kind of give
Mm.
us your insights on this. How do you approach structural stuff? Where do you do like in-person testing, or where do you start?
Yeah, I think the first thing to make people aware of is I look at the body like a bicycle wheel. So obviously, a bicycle wheel, you want it to spin straight and true, right? If a bicycle wheel is buckled, what you'll find it has, some spokes of the wheel will be too tight, other spokes will be too long and loose. And what you need to do is to tighten up the loose spokes and lengthen the tight spokes so that they're optimum length tension, so that you've now got a nice straight spinning wheel. The human body is similar in a way, but instead of the spokes, we've got muscles. And our muscles can have different length tension relationships. So, what you often have in the body, particularly in today's society, is on one side of a joint, you'll have muscles that are excessively tight, and muscles on the opposite side of the joint are therefore excessively long and often holding a lot of tension, right? So, what that does is, first of all, that puts abnormal stress through the muscle itself. So, that's increasing your likelihood of some kind of muscle pain, muscle injury. But probably more importantly, what it's doing is it's putting excessive stress through the tendons. So, that's the bit that joins the muscle to the bone, the ligaments that help to support the joint that those muscles cross, and the joint itself. So, you often get excessive forces in one, two, or even three planes of motion. So we live in a three-dimensional world. And when the body's not well aligned, i.e., it's structurally out of balance, there's excessive forces going through specific areas. Now, something like a ligament has a tensile strength greater than steel.
Wow.
So people say, well, how do you sprain a ligament if they're that strong? Well, the reason is because if you've got a ligament and it's being stretched, let's say 18 hours a day, that's putting a very low amplitude but long tempo stress through that material. And over time, that tensile strength will become weaker. So, what I remember back in 2002, so there was a footballer that played for England called Michael Owen. He was like a superstar, relatively young still footballer at the time. And he was playing in the match in the World Cup, and he went to change direction, and his knee just completely collapsed inwards, and he completely ruptured his anterior cruciate ligament. Now, the movement he did should never have ruptured an anterior cruciate ligament, but it was clear that that ligament would have been getting weakened over time because of some muscle imbalance that he had in his body. And he did also suffer from hamstring issues before that. And the hamstrings and the anterior cruciate ligament, they kind of help each other out in terms of what they do. So I guess probably the best example I've had was I was working with a rugby player called Billy. So he had been having injuries for 3 years when he came to see me, and what he was getting pain in his front of the thigh, so in his quadriceps, and also in his groin. he could play about 3 matches, and then he'd be on the sidelines. So he'd go and see the physio. He might get some massage. He might get some acupuncture, maybe some stretches to do. And after about 3 matches on the sidelines, he'd go back and he'd play 3 matches. And after the third match, he'd be injured again. So there's lots of threes there. 3 years, 3 matches on, 3 matches off. It was pretty much a rough story of what happened to him. So he was semi-professional. He had been playing for a club that played in the Premier League in England, but he was now playing a level down, so he was semi-pro, but still high level, second tier English rugby. And he came to me and he said, "Look, I've basically got 2 months of off season until I go back to the pre-season training for next season. This is what's going on. Do you think you'll be able to help?" So I said, "Look, I can't guarantee I can help, but I can certainly help you the best I can." So I did a very in-depth physical assessment on him. So found all of his imbalances in his body, designed what we call a corrective exercise program, showed him how to do the exercises and the stretches, and he went off for 4 weeks, did the program, and that was really laying the foundations of what was to come. So he came back after 4 weeks. I reassessed him, and now I had to design a new program. Now, I said to him at the time, it would be great if you had a longer off season, because I want to be able to get you so you're so robust you're not going to get injured playing for the next season or two. But I only had 4 weeks. So I had to make a bit of a, you could call it educated guess, you could call it educated risk taking, because I knew in 4 weeks' time he was going to start pre-season. So I said to him, "Well, what do you do in pre-season?" And he said, "Well, we tackle bags, we do agility work, we might be doing sprints, we might be doing fartlek type training, but they weren't doing full-on tackling and passing and kicking and all that kind of stuff." So I thought to myself, right, well, he needs to be strong enough to at least survive that. So I gave him his next program that built upon the foundation, but what I wanted to make sure that he was strong enough to survive what he was about to do. It was a little bit risky. I would have liked to have spent longer with the foundation, but that's what I went with. So he did that 4 weeks of training. He started his pre-season. And to cut a very long story short, what he did was throughout the season, he just swapped those 4-week programs throughout the season. And he played the whole season, didn't get injured once, played every single game. And at the end of the season, he said to me, "I've never felt so fit and strong." He said, "I was bursting through tackles. I was more agile. I was changing direction quicker than ever. And I was kicking and punting longer than I've ever done before." And that was, we only worked on his structure. That's all we worked on. So again, that was just another example I look back on and just think how rewarding for me, right, as well.
Yeah.
It's really rewarding that,
Yeah.
this guy, he was in love with rugby. That's what he loved to do. He identified himself as a rugby player, but how much longer would he have been able to play in the way that he was? He might have had 1, maybe 2 seasons, and he probably would have dropped down levels as well, because you can't keep expecting the coach to keep picking you if you're always injured,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that was really great working with him. In terms of the neurological side, so this can potentially be a whole podcast in itself. But again, the thing that's important to understand is that pain is like an alarm system. It's a bit like, there's lots of analogies, but if you think of if you're driving your car and you get an engine warning light come up on your dashboard, it's telling you that something's wrong. And what you should do in that case is take it to your local mechanic. They diagnose the problem, they fix it, and then you go on your way and the light won't be on anymore. What sadly tends to happen is that people get into pain they often go to a medical professional of some sort. And quite often, the first port of call is medication, painkillers, anti inflammatories. In my analogy of the engine warning light on your dashboard, that's like taking it to your mechanic and they cut the electric signal
Yeah.
going to the bulb of the warning light. Or
Yeah.
they'll give you they get a piece of black tape,
Yeah.
put it over the light so you can't see it.
Yeah.
So you haven't addressed what the root cause of the problem is, right? So what happens with what we call chronic pain? So chronic pain generally is pain that lasts longer than 3 months, okay? What often happens is that someone has an initial injury, the tissues heal, but the pain remains. So what's happening here is your alarm system is still going off. So let's just use it as a fire alarm in your house, right? You're in your house, the fire alarm goes off, you realize there is a fire, you get out, you call the fire brigade. The fire brigade come along, they put the fire out, but the alarm's still going, right? You might even rebuild the whole house because it completely burnt down, but the alarm is still going off, but there's no fire. So what's happening there is that your nervous system has become overstimulated. Now, the areas of stimulation can come from many different areas. So it could be structural, right? So if there is any structural stress on the body, that can be inputting into the nervous system. If you've got any of the things that we spoke about nutritionally, that can be inputting into the nervous system. Or it can be other types of stress. So it could be emotional stress. It could be financial stress. It could be relationship stress. It could be that, you know, as a child, you had some kind of trauma. So, you know, the common ones, you know, physical, sexual, and it can be emotional trauma as well. You know, not feeling loved by your parents can be quite a trauma. Now, what your body doesn't realize is that when there's all these inputs into the body, it doesn't realize that there's no actual physical threat. It's just that your nervous system is oversensitized. We call that central sensitization because it's sensitization of the central nervous system. So what we need to do in those situations is to calm it down. Now, a really interesting example, and this is a story I love to tell. So I was actually finishing my CHEK training in California, and at the end of our training, they fly in a client for you to work with. And the lady I worked with, I can't give you her real name, so I don't have permission to talk about the story, but I'll call her Karen. So she flew in from Hawaii, and she was a marine biologist. She was 50 years old, and she'd been in pain for 25 years, right? So when you consider that, you know, our cells turn over every 2 years, she didn't have the same body that she had 25 years ago. So why is she still in pain, right? Now, what was interesting about Karen, all her pain was on the left side of her body. So left neck, left shoulder, which pain radiated down her left arm, and she had pain in her left lower back. Now, interestingly, 25 years previously, she hit her back on something sharp, and on a different occasion, she fell off a mountain bike and landed on her left arm. So you think, well, that was the cause of the pain. So I did my usual physical assessment. I looked at her nutrition, and before I started working with her, so I got a whole load of paperwork, health questionnaires, all her health history, everything. And when I looked at her pain, I thought, okay, so left side of the body. Now we know from a lot of Eastern philosophy, like traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, etc., they look at the body as the left side being of female energy and the right
Mm.
side of as male energy.
Yeah.
And because she had pain in her kind of neck, shoulder, arm region, in the kind of Eastern philosophy of the chakra systems, interestingly, there's a picture of the chakras behind me. Um, the neck, shoulder, arm relates to communication. So I just thought, I wonder if this is part of the root cause of the problem. So in our first consultation, I said, so I'm just curious, what's your relationship like with your mother? Because quite often that it normally relates to a close relative, right? And it would
Mm.
normally be a parent. So I asked her that question, and well, let's just say I opened up a massive can of worms with that question, right? So, I mean, this woman was so polite and calm and sweet. She was a lovely, lovely woman. And she said, don't talk to me about my mother. She never loved me.
Oy.
My sister was her favorite. She never gave me any attention. We haven't spoken for years. We don't get on. And I thought, wow, that's hit a nerve. That's interesting. So what I did design an exercise program for her. I did teach her about nutrition and lifestyle. We went out for lunch together every day so I could kind of show her how I ate. But most of the time we spent together, so we had 4 days together. And most of that time, I actually coached her in a technique called nonviolent communication. And the idea was that she would go home and reach out to her mother and try to reconnect, let's say, with her mother and be honest with her and tell her how she felt as a child and how she's feeling now. And I kind of explained to her why I was asking her to do that and how it could be related to her bodily pain. So we worked together for 4 days. She flew off to Hawaii. I flew back to the UK. 6 months later, I get a letter from Hawaii, and I think, that will almost certainly be from Karen. So I open up the letter, and it says, Leigh, I can't thank you enough. Not only has my neck, shoulder, arm, and back pain gone, but I reached out to my mother. We've made up. We've got an amazing relationship now, and we see each other every day, and we're enjoying
Wow.
every minute we have together.
That's amazing, bro.
So,
Amazing.
what that can sometimes tell us is that our bodies are often trying to tell us something that we need to address, whether it's your posture, whether it's your diet, or whether it's your relationships, or whether it's your whatever stress it might be, right? And that's why, my teacher, Paul Chek, has termed the phrase the pain teacher.
Mm.
Pain is always trying to teach you something, whether it's don't push down any harder on that foot because it's going to go through that nail, or stop eating that stuff because whenever you do, you get shoulder pain, or you need to sort out your relationship with your mother.
Yeah.
Right? It's always trying to tell you something. And the important thing is if you can't work out yourself what it's trying to tell you, reach out to someone who can read the body and help you decode what it's trying to tell you, and then point you in the right direction if you need any more help in terms of how you can actually overcome that. Now, what I would just add is so I've given you examples where one was predominantly structural, one was predominantly nutritional, one was predominantly what I would call neurological. But my experience is there's always more than one factor, and sometimes all three are involved. And an interesting thing, so there's lots of things that have been coming out in recent years about pain science. And one of the things that's generally accepted, discussed, is that they say there's no such thing between posture and pain, right? And they'll pull up studies proving the case. But when you actually look at the studies, and when you look at a meta-analysis, which means looking at a group of studies, when you look carefully at them, they actually prove that there is a relationship between the two. So I'll give you an example. One, in the meta-analysis, it would say, well, we had one group of people who had lower back pain, and we got them to do extension exercises of their spine, We've got another group to do flexion exercise of the spine, and the results were the same. Some people got better, some people were the same, some people got worse. So therefore, it doesn't work. But what they didn't do, they didn't assess them before they started and say, well, this group needs extension, and this group needs flexion, and this group needs something else, right? So you have to be careful when it comes to just following what people tell you the science actually means.
Yeah.
Now, in a lot of people, it might be that their posture, their structure isn't involved. That's definitely the case. You know, in my case of Karen, I don't think physically was a major factor. I gave her exercises to do, and they probably did help, but I don't think that was the major factor. But what I've seen is, as an example, the most common pain/injury I've worked with over the years is when people have damaged discs in their lumbar spine. That's been the most common. Every single one of them, without fail, have had the same kind of posture, particularly in their lumbar spine.
Like what? What's that like?
So it tends to be flat,
Uh-huh.
right? So allegedly normal lumbar curve is between 30 to 35 degrees of extension. So that's when the lumbar curve is at its optimum level in terms of dissipating forces from above. Because obviously it has to dissipate force for the entire spine, right? And that's why as you get lower in the spine, the discs and the vertebral bodies get bigger because it has to take more load. Up in the neck, they're pretty small, but down by the sacrum, they're pretty big.
Yeah.
And it's really, and it, you know, again, it's if you understand how the structure works, that's quite simple, because if your lower back is more flattened, it's going to put more stress through the front of the disc, and the back. So the disc is like, it's kind of spongy. It's a bit like a donut. It's got a nucleus in the middle, which is like the jelly of the donut. Well, if you squeezed one end of a donut, the jam or the jelly, whichever way you want to call it, is going to move away from the bit you're squeezing, right? Exactly the same things happens with the discs. So if you're sitting all day, which most people do, they generally sit with a slumped lumbar spine, a flat spine. So the disc is getting pushed posteriorly for X number of hours a day, right? Again, remember, ligaments are very strong, but if they're constantly being stretched, at some point they're going to go. And it's the same with the discs. The discs are very strong, but if you're constantly putting load through it, at some point, the smallest little thing, and you're going to be in trouble. And I've experienced that myself, right? I've blown a disc out of my lumbar spine. And people often say to me, well, how did you do that? And I said, I just woke up one morning and I couldn't move. You know, I wasn't playing rugby. I wasn't in a car accident. I did deadlifts a couple of days before, and I was doing a lot of Bikram yoga, which I think was actually part of the issue. I think Bikram yoga wasn't right for my body. And so, you know, I know what it's like to go through such a serious injury, and that put me in a really good position in terms of being able to empathize with people.
Yeah.
Because I've been there, I've lived it. But the interesting thing with my back injury, I mean, first of all, I was really embarrassed because I'd already been helping people heal from that kind of injury for, what would it have been, 12 years by that point. And I kind of thought, well, with all my knowledge, how does that happen? But we're all human, right?
Yeah.
And interesting, you were talking about writing your books. I was writing a book at the time, and I was spending a lot of time seated. I wasn't doing as much exercise as I would have liked. I wasn't getting as much sleep. And the region of my spine that was injured is in the region of the second chakra. So the second chakra, one of the things it relates to is the water element, and it relates to the rhythm and flow of your life. Well, my life didn't have any rhythm and flow because it was go, 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 go. I was so focused on getting this book finished because I had a meeting planned in California with the people that were going to publish the book, and it was set in the diary. The flights were booked, and I had to get it finished. Hence, I was spending so long doing it.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a double-edged sword that, I'm writing this book, and it was on biomechanics, tennis biomechanics, and literally, you know, 4 weeks before I'm due to fly out, I get a blown disc. And when I look back, yes, there was structural aspects to it for sure. I was sitting too much. I was doing the wrong kind of movements in Bikram yoga, excessive wrong movements. But I was also way too busy. And sometimes what pain will do is it will force you to slow down if you're making yourself too busy.
Yeah, yeah,
So my my learning from my own experience with that injury was I need to really make sure no matter what I'm doing, no matter what goal I've got, no matter what deadline I've got, I have to set a core value around making sure I've got enough rest and recovery time. Yes, there might be the odd day where you've just got to grind it out. Fine. But then the next day, you've got to make sure you give yourself that time to rest, get to bed early, make sure you're eating right, hydrating right. All those things, they're going to help you recover.
yeah, bro. So that is so true, and it feels like right now that's the kind of situation I'm in because the last few months have been so busy. I'm doing so much work up here in the office. Some days I finish at 10 o'clock, and all I have time is for a quick little meal, and then I walk the dog for an hour, kind of outside in the darkness because it's too hot to be outside in the day, and then I'm back home, and then bed, and then it's been like that for too long, and my I have this lower back pain from sitting at the and I have this chair is really good. It's like a
Mm,
700 euro chair, and I also have a really nice um kneeling chair, so I
mm,
can interchange between the two. The kneeling chair really allows you to for the back to be a bit more mobile, and there's a bunch of different positions, but nothing is helping right now. Until a few days ago, I was like, you know what, screw this. So the first 2 hours of the workday, instead of being up here working, I'm just like out with the dog, walking around, doing some, something on the mat, like some just basic exercises, foam rolling, and it's already starting to improve. And I think it's just my body telling me, dude, like there is actually more to life than work.
yeah.
So but it's also like the thing about you writing a book, and sometimes I joke with people when they're like, oh my god, you wrote a book, that's so impressive. I'm like, I'll tell you one thing though that I learned is writing a book about health is the least healthy thing I've ever done. It's the most unhealthy thing, yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah,
Definitely
brother.
relate to that for sure. But I mean, I've written another book since that one, and I did it in a much better way. I didn't. I had the only deadlines I had were my own.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, I could be a lot more. I could write it in a much healthier way.
exactly. And that's kind of the plan for the next one. I already have it planned out, the topics and the chapters. I just said to myself, it doesn't matter. Like, nobody gives a shit about your thing. Like, that's what I have to keep reminding myself. So whether it comes out 6 months later, like, very few people, it's gonna matter to very few people. So there's no point in adding all of this psychological stress on top of it's almost, sometimes I feel like life would be so easy and I'd be so successful if I didn't constantly get in my own way and sabotage myself over the past 25 years or so.
Mm.
Yeah,
We know you just brought up an interesting word there, sabotage, because that's actually one way in which people stay in pain, and that comes on for me. That comes under my neurological aspect, right? Because when we're growing up, so say in the first 7 years of life, we only have access to two different brainwave states, the delta and the theta. Delta is like a deep sleep state, theta is like a meditative state. So in the first 7 years of life, you don't really have the ability to decipher the environment around you. It just gets downloaded and that becomes who you are. And very rarely does that change throughout the rest of your life. Now, there are ways in which you can change it, but most people aren't aware of how to change that. But what happens often when you're young, especially if you live in the Western world, especially if you've got a big family, the only time you get one of your parents, and it's normally the mother, the only time you get one-to-one time with them is when you're sick,
Mm.
right? So in your subconscious mind, as you get older, you think, well, the only way I get love and attention is when there's something wrong with me,
Mm.
right? This is going on at the subconscious level. So, if anyone's listening to this and they're thinking, I don't consciously make myself feel pain, I don't want to be in pain, I agree with you. And that's because it's happening at the subconscious level. So, what some people will do is they will oftentimes choose behaviors in their life, carry out behaviors in their life that will make sure they're in pain. Because at the subconscious level, if they're not in pain, they're no longer worthy of love from others.
Hmm. That
So
is
I did
so
say the
profound,
neurological
bro.
side of it is a
Yeah.
big subject, and we could go in so many different
Oh yeah.
directions there. But that's a big one that I've seen in my practice as well.
Oh yeah.
Is what we call the saboteur archetype. Is
Hmm.
that people become so frightened of being well because they feel they won't be loved. Because again, you know, growing up, from 0 to 7, that's one of the most important things, that you feel safe and
Yeah.
you feel loved.
Loved. Yeah.
And if you don't have either of those things, the chances are, you might create pain, illness when you get older, because that's your way of feeling safe.
Yeah. 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 And I've seen this pattern with myself and my wife as well. I remember, it was like maybe last year in the springtime. She went off to do this So she started with Pilates mat, and then she wanted to do the progress to reform, all the good stuff. So she was at the certification course, and she basically, I think on the second, like about midway through it, she basically put her back out, and she came back like she couldn't move, she couldn't pick up anything. So, but that wasn't the first time. Anytime like her business, her ballet, she's a ballet teacher as well. That's her was her career. So anytime like her business would take off, like she would get an injury. And
Mm,
at one point I was like, listen, like we have to like, it's clear the pattern, like it's so clear, even I can see it, so we have to really get this out in the open. And now since then, since we kind of realized, okay, this is definitely a self-sabotaging pattern, we even like, I have a even have he's actually technically a self-sabotage sort of specialist, but he does like
mm,
cognitive behavior therapy. So we're working with a therapist on just all kinds of stuff. Just it's always, everybody needs a coach or some sort of someone to help them with something that they're dealing with. Nobody's got it all together. But since then, I've like, touch wood, man. But actually, she's doing tons of exercise, tons of different classes and different things as well, and even more certifications. And she's fitter and stronger than ever. And anytime she feels a twinge, I'm like, don't ruin it now. Don't go self sabotage though. So it's definitely, and I feel like the whole pain thing, like me and like growing up, I definitely use that as a way to maybe where there's a lot of conflict in the family. If you kind of not necessarily get sick, but you're injured or something is wrong with you, then attention comes on you, and you're sort of diffusing a lot of tension, because parents are like, parents' attention is on you. And the unfortunate thing is, then we will, because those patterns got what we wanted, we will then progress through life with very unhealthy patterns. And I think that's how I got into all the trouble I did in my 20s, basically.
yeah, one thing that I see reasonably a lot is when a child doesn't feel seen. They're not getting the attention they crave. It might be they're in a they might have a big family, let's say, or they might be the middle child. That often tends to be the case. When a child isn't getting enough attention or perceived attention in their eyes, they're often the attention seeker, or they're often the naughty one, because that's their way
Mm.
of getting attention. Right? If you won't listen to me, I'm going to make sure you notice me. Right? But those people, again, often tend to be, it might, and again, not in every case, but more often than not, they tend to be the ones that are in that chronic pain cycle, because they're still trying to crave the love that they felt they never got when they were really young.
Yeah.
So getting into that unconscious mind and rewiring that program is really important. And there's lots of different ways you can do it. Things like um, hypnotherapy can be a really good way. There's lots of energy
Yeah.
medicine. So I do the emotion code.
Yeah.
People do applied kinesiology, cranial sacral therapy. There's lots of different ways in which you can address that. But yeah, it's quite an interesting uh, pattern that I've seen
Yeah.
over the years.
For sure, bro. For sure. Great. Well, yeah. This is such one question I want to ask you, just because I know you're so much more deeper in this stuff, and I have done various courses over the years that and I never was interested enough to really go deep on it. But I was doing when I was living in Ireland. You probably know the National College. Was it the National Training Center? Sorry. So I did some courses there in personal training and neuromuscular therapy and stuff. So the dude that runs it, John Sharkey, he's quite a thought leader in sort of pain and neuromuscular therapy. And so they talk a lot about trigger points. What's your take? Do you deal with that? And then the other thing also, maybe you can weave into, do you do this type of work online, like the analysis and the assessments? Maybe run in case people want to reach out.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it can be done online. Uh, some people, I would say, look, listen, with your situation, I would need to see you in person.
Mm.
With some instances,
Mhm.
but I've worked with people literally all over the world,
Cool,
and
cool.
the more technology gets sophisticated, the more it's enabling me to work online.
Hmm.
I mean, obviously, hands-on therapies, you know, I would
Yeah,
have to
can
physically
beat
see
it.
someone to do that. The assessments I still do in person. There are limited ways you can do some physical assessments with apps that are out today.
Yeah,
What's tended to happen is if I feel I need to see someone, what people tend to do is they'll fly in to see me every 2 months for a couple of days. So that's tended to happen.
mm.
In terms of trigger points, yep. So again, I work with my hands. Um, sometimes sometimes I find dry needling is needed. Not always, or rarely, I should say. But dry needling can be really useful for dealing with things like trigger points. But if the trigger point is being caused by a muscle imbalance, you still got to address the muscle imbalance. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's just going to come back anyway.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, yeah. That's one thing, because I remember when I after training for my Thai boxing fight in when I was about 30, some 10 years ago. After even months after that, I had this horrible pain in my left hip joint. Where the femur kind of in that I forget the name of the joint, but I was going to this dude who is Conor McGregor's basically his main, at least at the time, Dr. Payne, they called him his main physiotherapist. And he was doing this thing, dude, where he was a big massive guy from Moldova or whatever, and like he would like take his elbow and you would be on his table, and he had go like Jesus music and like sort of Greek Orthodox chanting and like these icons of saints and stuff. And you're like almost like, dude, am I gonna be like sacrifice here or what the fuck's going on? But this guy would like, he'd take his elbow and he would basically press it into your stomach, various parts, like the where the psoas is, this kind of stuff. And
Mm.
I figured that maybe, I mean, he could barely speak English, but he never explained what he did. But what I found later is probably he was working on trigger points that had formed in my psoas, because I think my psoas was so tight that it was pulling the bone, and that was grinding the joint, and that was causing me a lot of pain at night. But it was pretty intense. And so actually my wife had started going to him, and one day I was with her for her session, and that's when I kind of signed up to start working with him. But she was there like crying. She was crying, and I'm like, Do you cry every time?" "Oh yeah, yeah, I'm crying every time. It's extremely painful." That's why I call him Doctor Pain. So he did this to me. It was the most painful, horrible thing. But in maybe 10 sessions, 12, 14 sessions, he actually did fix me. But the craziest thing at the end was, I don't know if he does this to everybody, but my wife was like, "Oh yeah, he puts you out," and he basically sticks his thumbs into your neck. I don't know where exactly, but you just lose consciousness for like a minute or so. And I'm like, dude, what the hell is that? Like, why you do that? And apparently, it's because of what you were talking about, the kind of the neurological thing. It resets
Mm.
the nervous system and the brain, so you can actually, like you were saying, structurally, you can maybe start working on the trigger point and all that good stuff. But if you have this sort of neuroplastic habit, or the neurological habit of being in pain, that's almost like a morphogenetic field that you need to sort of dissolve by. And one way he does it is with freaking just putting it out, so your whole nervous system is reset. What's your thoughts on that as we wrap up today?
Interesting. Um,
Interesting.
I
Yeah.
mean, listen, there are so many techniques out there, and I'm not familiar with all of them. I'm not going to really comment on something I don't know
Yeah.
the ins and outs of. But what I would say from the hands-on work that I do, it's very rarely is it painful.
Mm.
There are certain areas of the body that just tend to be tender, like the pectoralis minor muscle tends to be
Yeah.
a little bit tight. The pterygoids in the mouth tend to be quite tight. I would say the psoas. When I work on the psoas, I would call that very slight discomfort.
Hmm.
But most of the time, when I'm working on people, it's actually quite a pleasant experience, and it's very effective. It's not pleasant because it's not working.
Yeah.
And I think what we're taught is when you're good with your hands, it shouldn't be painful.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying other techniques that are painful aren't good as well. I'm sure they are. I mean, I know
Yeah.
rolfing, for instance, is very painful, but has been shown to be very effective. So
Yeah. Yeah. I prefer the we had one lady, she's Dutch. She kind of comes to your house here, and she does, like, she does a few different things like Thai massage and stuff like that, but it's very like gentle. But then you're almost floating, like she basically sets this blanket on your floor, and she just kind of like does all this weird stuff. You don't know what the hell's going on. But I'm like, dude, I used to when she used to come to the house, I'd be like falling asleep while I'd be like, how you yawn and release tension. I'd be
mm,
like yawning there, ready to like literally go for a nap, only for I have to like let her out the house and stuff. But and then you feel like really good the days after. So I totally agree. It doesn't have to be painful. And I think the no pain no gain. I do have like the dude I interviewed about this similar topic a few months ago that I met in Mexico at Acapulco. His thing is a no pain no gain thing, but I gotta say, if the person that does it right knows what they're doing, like, because he did the thing only on my right arm, and for months, dude, like I was just like, my neck pain went away. So I think it's all about having a skilled practitioner, and then the method they use really doesn't matter as long as you get the end result, I think.
yeah, I agree completely.
Okay, Lee, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we wrap up, just let the listener know where they can connect with you, and if they want to know further information, all that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So if anyone's listening to this and they're totally fed up of being in pain and they want to know what might be keeping them stuck, what they can do is I've got a free chronic pain breakthrough blueprint that they can have access to. And they can find that at www.bodychek, that's bodychek.co.uk/free pain guide.
Cool. Any social media or anything like that you wanna?
Yeah, I mean, if they go to my website, which is bodycheck.co.uk, I'm on Instagram,
Sweet.
Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and soon to be on TikTok. So I've just got a new
Nice.
social media coach, and she's told me I've got to go on TikTok.
Yeah, dude.
Um,
Like, if you're not on TikTok, do you even exist, right?
and also, I don't know when this will go out, but I've got a new podcast starting on the 25th of August, and that will be called Beyond the Pain.
Cool. Awesome stuff. Right. We're gonna have all those links in the show description, folks. So check that out. And Leigh, thank you again so much for joining us today and sharing your deep wisdom and insights, man.
Christian, thanks for having me again. It's been a pleasure.